خلينا نبدأ يا جماعة. Okay, today we'll conclude this chapter. Few topics there are to talk about. One of those is ethics in decision making. Okay. In previous lectures we have discussed the issues related to perception, and after that other issues which is related to decision making. Now when we talk about ethical criteria for decision making, of course there are different models. We are going to discuss one of those. Now mainly we can say that there are three important criteria for decision making. One of those, people when they take decisions, or employees within organizations when they take the decisions, one of the criteria that we consider in general is utilitarianism. Here we are talking about up to what extent we can best utilize the decision. And here what we focus on is the outcome of the decision. So according to utilitarianism, here we focus more on the output and what are the outcomes, and to what extent those outcomes are going to fulfill different objectives that we seek to achieve. Now another criteria that usually we take into consideration is rights. And when you talk about rights, here we are talking about right and wrong, up to what extent the decision is, we can say, fair for others, or it's not going to harm others in terms of what their rights are. Okay, so here we are talking about up to what extent the decision is not going to abuse fundamental liberties and privileges of individuals. Okay, those are the first and second criteria. We said that there are three main criteria, and again I need to repeat here that this is one of the models that we use to discuss what are the ethical criteria for decision making. Now the third point is justice. And when we talk about justice, here we are talking about up to what extent there is commitment to rules, regulations, laws, and so on. Okay. So now we expect that there are outcomes of each criterion. When anyone is involved in decision-making process, taking into consideration those three different criteria, we expect some sort of consequences of considering such a criteria. For example, when you talk about utilitarianism, here we expect that there is more efficiency when it comes to output, productivity, achieving goals, and so on. But at the same time, talking about or taking utilitarianism into consideration, sometimes it is going to ignore individuals' liberties, and when we talk about their rights and so on. In the United States of America, the most abused the fear here is dealing with minorities. Sometimes and minorities not on the basis of race only, minorities in the organization, even sometimes according to the base of gender, for example, or any other base. Now here, making sure to achieve the best out of the decision, again, we can reach objectives, goals. The productivity is going to be very high, for example, but we fear that sometimes there is some sort of abuse of individuals' rights. Okay. Now, when you talk about rights, here we expect some sort of balance. If we are taking utilitarianism and rights into consideration as a criteria, we expect here some sort of balance. Why? Because when you talk about rights, and here we are talking about up to what extent the decision is complying with individuals' liberties and privileges and so on. Here we expect to protect individuals from harm which is related to preserving their rights. Here we are talking about how to keep their rights and not to abuse their rights. At the same time, okay, when we talk about the working environment, we expect more effective working environment, or at least we can say here more comfortable working environment. where there is less problems which is related to abusing the rights of individuals, we expect the human relations within the organization, of course, that it is going to face less problems. Why? Because there is some sort of maintaining or preserving here the rights of individual. Now, when you talk about justice, we expect here also more balance created through using those criteria for decision making, ethical criteria for decision making. Why? Because again, when you talk about justice here, we protect the rights of the weaker individuals within the organization. Wherever there is regulations and laws, it is one of the rule of regulations and laws to protect the people within the community or society in general. So when we talk about organizations, if there are clear mandates, bylaws, regulations, etc., we expect here to protect the rights of all the individuals in the organization, regardless their power, whether they are whether they have authority or their authority is minor, whether their position is high or low. We expect here to protect all individuals, especially, of course, this is a privilege for weak members within the organization. And of course, it is going to encourage sense of entitlement. And here we are talking more about loyalty, belongingness to the organization. Also we expect here, if we want to relate this to some of the variables we usually discuss, this should decrease, for example, turnover rate, absenteeism, and it should increase other like satisfaction, productivity, and so on. So again, here when we talk about the ethical decision-making criteria, let me repeat here one more time, there is no standard here, there is no best model, there are different models which discussing this area. This is one of the ideas that we can use in order to develop some sort of ethical criteria to deal with decisions. There are three main criteria to take into consideration: utilitarianism, and here we care about the output. We need to emphasize rights. Why? Because individuals, they feel that their rights should not be abused by others within the organization. Also, we should emphasize justice here because we need to protect all individuals within the organization regardless their position or authority, power, whatever. Okay. Now, this is one of the points that we needed to go through, which is related to decision making. Of course, in a previous lecture I have mentioned that, but again, let us go through it again. We have not discussed the mechanisms of decision making. We have discussed issues related to the applications on behavior, of course, of decision making process. But when you talk about the mechanisms, of course, there are a lot of details which we are, at least in this course, we are not interested in. In general, we have discussed what are the steps of the decision-making process, but we did not go through the mechanisms in details. Of course, this you are going to study in other courses. Now, still, of course, here we are going to talk about creativity. The title is, it's not right here. We are not talking about ethics in decision making. We are going to talk about creativity. Of course, when we talk about creativity, one of the direct applications of creativity, which is going to show us up to what extent employees are creative, is the decisions that they take. Because all the work usually it depends on the decisions taken by employees. It is going to show at the end as performance. So here, one of the most important indicators that we judge individuals within an organization, whether they are creative or not, is the decisions that they take, especially that we must know that it's not important to take decision. What is most important here is to implement the decision. يعني it's not success to take a right decision. The real success here is to implement the decision and change the situation from worse to better and so on. So here we need to discuss some issues which is related to creativity. Why? Because it is one of the most important indicators to judge the decisions of the employees, whether it was up to the interest of the organization or not. Now, what is creativity? What is creativity?
It's like the ability to think and come up with new ideas and new things regarding specific subjects.
Okay, and usually when we talk about new ideas, new things, not necessarily that we develop new things. At least we can develop the application. It's not always creating something. Sometimes it is developing something which is already available. But anyway, here we are talking about coming with new ideas, new things which we can use while we are performing different tasks within the organization. When we talk about creativity here within the organizational context. So it is important to be creative. Or so many organizations, especially when we talk especially when we talk about the private sector, they have a keen interest in creativity. They provide their employees with some courses that should develop creativity, for example. They consider creativity as one of the criteria maintained by the performance appraisal system of the organization in order to appraise the employees. Why organizations, especially when you talk about the private sector at least, they highly appreciate creativity and they develop tools to measure creativity. Also, they provide employees with some mechanisms which should enhance their ability of creativity and so on. Why? Yes?
Because when we're talking about the private sector, most of the time we are talking about profitable organization. And the profitable organization care more for the profit, and creativity gives them the way or gives the management or the employees to, as we said before, come up with new ideas and utilize these ideas. Maybe this will enhance their abilities and hence.
Okay, and when you talk, what I have said was that private sector appreciate more. Of course, all organizations should take into consideration that their employees should be creative. But when you talk about the private sector, they have the mechanisms, they appreciate more. And usually it is very clear when we talk about the private sector. Because maybe profitability here is one of the issues which force private sector to work more to develop the creativity of employees. What else? Yes.
When the organization needs to faces complex situations, so it needs more creative ideas to deal with this.
When you talk.
Expand its business.
This is one of the issues. And when you talk about the decision-making process, for example, when you talk about problem-solving process in general, and especially when you talk about the initial stages, especially when we talk about problem diagnosis and how to understand the problem and so on, we need here to be creative. We must not see things how it looks. We must see things how it really is. And here, this is some sort of a margin between creative people and others who are less creative. How they perceive things, how they understand things, how they look at things and try to describe things and find out what is the real situation. Also, when we talk about developing alternatives, for example, here we are talking about expected solutions, and there is a great need here of creativity. Yes.
Competition also needs creativity.
And this is one of the most important issues, because when you talk about, for example, some approaches of change like total quality management and how organizations need to develop their products, services, and so on to compete with others, for example, here the organization must have high creativity, we can say here, of course, among the employees working within the organization. Of course, at the beginning I said that private sector exert more efforts to develop the creativity of employees. But this does not mean that only private sector need creative employees. All sectors, whether we are talking about public sector, whether we are talking about the non-governmental sector, for example, all sectors need creative employees. But when you talk about the private sector, usually private sector appreciate more the creative employees and develop more mechanisms to enhance the creativity of employees. Here, when we talk about how to find out the potential of creativity or creativity potential, we have studied a lot of, we can say here, factors related to individuals' personality, some traits, characteristics, and so on. According to study, it is expected, to different studies, it is expected that those people who have such traits, personal traits, have more potential for creativity. Yani those people who are intelligent, they have a higher potential for creativity, for example. When you talk about those people who have internal locus of control, they are more creative, for example. Those people who have openness, especially when we talk about openness to new experiences and so on, they have a higher potential for creativity. So there are some traits which exactly the individuals within the organization to be more creative. Of course, on the other hand, there are some factors which is related to the environment itself. When we talk about the organization and like the issue that we have discussed just right now, when we have said that the private sector usually appreciate creativity. So they are going to consider it as a criteria in their performance appraisal systems. There are going to be incentives for creative people. There are going, some mechanisms are going to be provided by the organization in order to enhance creativity. Training is going to be provided for employees and so on. Okay, so there are some personal factors, and at the same time there are some organizational factors that we need to take into consideration. Why such traits might enhance the potential for creativity? Why such traits in general, okay, might enhance the potential for creativity?
Mostly because most of these traits mean that those people who have these traits are more open-minded or more able to analyze things in a better way.
Okay, and this is one of the issues. That's why maybe the first trait which was mentioned here is openness. Okay, now the more we are open to new things, the more we have potential for creativity. Okay, and usually those people who are, we can say here, closed, they do not accept new ideas, they do not entertain with the new situations and so on. Usually such people have less potential to be creative. It is one of the issues. What else?
I think that the people, they are expecting the managers who motivates them. Like they know that this management is expecting something from us. So I think that they will work hard and be more creative to meet these standards and expectations.
Okay, yes.
This is for sure. So any individual has the intelligence, the experience, he should be able to produce creative ideas. This is a fact.
If the circumstances are suitable. Okay, that's why I said there are some personal factors and at the same time there are some organizational factors. Okay, and there are people who have the potential, but maybe if the organization does not encourage them or motivate them, for example, they are going to be frustrated. Okay, that's why maybe it is mentioned here that those people who preserve in the face of frustration, who stand in the face of frustration, are more. They have more potential for creativity. But here again, it does not depend only on the personal factors. There are other factors. We are talking about environmental factors. One of those factors, of course, it is the organizational factors. So having the potential is not enough. the organization here must develop some mechanisms to initiate this potential, to have real creativity in the organization, and to utilize the potential that the employees have in terms of potential creativity, to have a real output here in the organization. Anyways, here it is the same. Yani when we think about those points, as the organization should provide some mechanisms, let me say here, in order to facilitate creativity. Here, at the same level, the individuals must have some characteristics and traits to facilitate also creativity. So even if the organization provide all the mechanisms and the employees lack the potential and the required traits and characteristics, then have the potential and the organization did not provide the mechanisms needed, also it is useless here. So we need both. We need to have employees who have the potential and
an organization which provides employees here with the required mechanisms and tools to okay. Still we are talking about creativity. One of the issues that we need to discuss is how to improve creativity in decision making. When you talk about individuals here, there are three main requirements, and here we are discussing also another model. Okay, always when we discuss those issues, we are not talking about standard models. We are talking about some of the common models or well-known models that is used by different researchers and academics. Now, in this regard, it is important that individuals should have the expertise. Here we are talking about, of course, about work experience, and we consider this as the foundation for improving creativity and decision making. Now, why it is considered the foundation? Why it is considered the foundation? Yes?
Because the expertise is like about skills and knowledge and the main potentials maybe that we have just mentioned. And if we lack this
Exactly.
skills, and this means we have no creativity.
Okay, so if we lack the knowledge and skills, then what to do? We cannot do anything. So that's why it is considered the foundation. This is the baseline here. Employees who can be creative, they should have the required expertise. When we talk about expertise here, we are talking about a package of knowledge, skills, and its applications. How to utilize it and use it in work. Now, another important requirement here is creative thinking skills. Okay, we know about work. This is one of the points that is needed. We consider it as the foundation here, but also we need to think creatively. Okay, when you talk about creative thinking here, we are talking about the skills like reasoning and abilities, of course, like how to. When we talk here about abstract thinking, for example, we talk about diagnosis skills, for example, and we are talking here about a package of skills which is related to how to understand problems, how to diagnose problems, how to go through different steps of decision making process. So we need to think creatively. This is important. If we have the experience and we know how to think creatively, then at least here we have two conditions which is very important. Some people, they have the experience, but they lack the skills to think creatively. Of course, here we are talking about another problem. Like the first point that we have discussed, we said that if some people lack the experience, then they cannot be creative. And if some people, they have the experience, but they do not have the ability to think in a creative way, then also they it is difficult to be creative. Now, the third requirement, and we are here, what we imply that all those three requirements should be available together as a package. The third requirement, it is related to intrinsic task motivation. Up to what extent the task itself is appealing for the employees, or it is something that, here we are talking about motivation. Up to what extent employees are willing to engage in a certain situation that they have. So again, if the employees have the experience and they have the ability to think in a creative manner, but they lack the desire to engage in a certain situation, then here also we cannot have
a creative output. So we are talking about three different requirements that work together. Here we are talking about one package that should be available in order to have the creative output out of course of employees working within the organization. And here when we talk about the third point, again the role of the organization here is important, because here we are talking about up to what extent the organization can motivate employees to engage in certain situations. Here we are talking about incentives, performance appraisal system, and so on. We are talking about some human resource mechanisms that should be provided or initiated by the organization. Okay, last thing to talk about today is global implications. We have discussed different issues in this chapter. One of those, of course, is attributions. Okay. Now, there are cultural differences. This means that, of course, then it is going to affect what are the causes of behavior and how it is attributed and so on. You remember the attribution theory that we have discussed earlier. So from one culture to another, the output is expected in different way according to different cultural variables here or different cultural factors. Now when you talk about decision making, there is no much research about the topic whether there are different mechanisms between different cultures. But maybe earlier I have mentioned that usually even in unplanned manner we follow the same process. Yeah, when we talk about the decision-making process, we usually, we hear all people, kids, educated people, professional people, whatever. It is something like, it is spontaneous here. We automatically think this way without go through the process itself. Go through reading and the material and so on. So it is something that is done spontaneously by individuals who deal with the process in a spontaneous way, and those people who deal with the process in a professional way. And those people who consider the process, who understand the process, who know the steps, usually the results are much better here. Okay, comparing the results to those people who are using the process in a spontaneous way because they do not know what is the process. But those people who know the process, here we expect to have, of course, results which is better or higher. Now the third one is ethics, and whether there are differences related to different societies and so on. We can say that there is no global ethical standards. This means it is different. Okay, when you talk about ethical standards, it is different from one society to another. Why? Again, it is clear here. We say that there are no global ethical standards. There are ethical standards, but there is no global ethical standards. From one society to another, there are going to be differences in ethical standards. Again, here we take into consideration the culture itself, and of course, in addition to other factors, learning. We are talking even when we talk about history and so on. There are many different factors here, which is going to influence what are the ethical standards. Always there are ethical standards. Okay, even thieves, they have ethical standards. They have their own ethical standards. Okay, but there are no global ethical standards. And even when we talk about occupations, when we different occupations, the different people in different organizations and so on, there are different standards. Okay, so even in the same society, we need to differentiate here between general ethical standards and between occupational ethical differences in the situation itself. If we are talking about the global implications, we are talking about differences here in societies, in cultures, and so on. If we are talking about organizations, we are talking here about differences between different organizations. If we are talking about different occupations, we are talking about differences related to occupations, and even within occupations we are talking about differences related to individuals. So again, there are no global ethical standards related to ethics in general. Okay, any questions? طيب يعطيكم العافية. هيك بنكون خلصنا الشابتر. احنا ان شاء الله المحاضرة الجاية راح نبدأ بشابتر جديد.